All right, I'm going to go ahead before I get started and turn it on over to Deanne for our Movement Mortgage Minute. Go ahead, Deanne.
Hi, everyone. Happy Monday. Looks like the feds are going to meet tomorrow, so we'll know what the how inflation numbers come out. So we're expecting that we'll see a little bit of an increase in the Fed fund, maybe a quarter. If it's a half, we might see, some volatility in the market, but it's going to be anywhere from a quarter to a half. So that's the last rate hike this year. So hopefully that will go into 2023 and it will be less volatile and we'll get lots of sales going on. One thing that Movement and many other companies are doing is when we do a purchase transaction from this point through March, if the borrowers need to refinance come third quarter, we will do the refinance and eliminate some of the lender fees. Okay, so that doesn't mean it's a free mortgage refinance, but what it means is some of those fees won't be duplicated. So that's how we're handling that, because we're really optimistic that things will get even better third quarter.
Great to hear. What's the current, can you give me the current rate?
It's, if everything is good, if it's a jumbo, it's in that 6 range. If it's a conforming FHA, it's 6 1/4 to 0.625.
Okay.
So it's just depends on the product. And then of course, if you have subpar credit scores, that's when you start hearing us loan officers start to talk about the 7s. It's just because the credit scores are, under 700, and there's quite a hit on that sort of thing.
Okay. So you're still seeing a lot of co-borrowers where you're having to put mom and dad and all that on the loan to kind of get the...
You know what, we are seeing that, but the agents really have been great that we're working with, getting more realistic on the price and getting the sellers for price reductions and seller concessions. And so that's happening. And one thing that I went on a training, and I would highly recommend that if you don't do the training that you go to it, but went to a training last week from Ticor, and they were talking about wraps. That's when the seller, provides seller financing, and the buyers make up the difference between the loan amount and the purchase price. So it kind of looks like an assumption, but the seller stays in title. Okay. So anyways, was really good training. And it really made me understand that sellers who want to actually move their properties will consider that type of financing.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's called a wrap. And I would just encourage each of you to, either Rochelle, there's addendums on that you can pull out.
Mm-hmm.
And also the title companies do a really good job. Ticor did a great job in explaining it. And I think it will open things up for your sellers. Correct. If they want to get their properties moved.
Wonderful.
Well, I'm glad to say that's on the calendar this Wednesday at 11 a.m.
It is.
In person or on Zoom. So Wednesday, we have Ticor bringing forth that same training. So yay.
It's excellent. It's really excellent. And I'm glad you're doing it, Candace. Good job.
We seem to be dialed in. We've heard good things from that class. So I think that would be a great one for you guys to attend. And thanks for the endorsement, Deanne, for that product and for that option. I mean, we're looking for any type of ideas creatively. We think outside the box. And sometimes that's all it takes. We've had a few properties in the last week that have been moved because of the products that the lenders have put forth. So love all of that and appreciate your time and the update on the rates and the mortgage market for us. Thank you. All right, to jump in, I think you guys are excited about, I've got a few people that have jumped on tonight. So we're talking about final walkthrough. I looked through our library and I did not see this covered. And I asked Shannon, I said, Shannon, I think, have we covered this? She goes, no, but you talk about it like every week. There's somebody doing a final walkthrough or some issue that's come up on a final walkthrough or some issue that a consumer is called into our office about, unhappy about. So I think this would be just all around a topic that we probably need to cover on a Zoom meeting. And so we will be talking tonight about a final walkthrough. Like we have in the past, you're welcome to chat in the chat window. If you have questions or you have a specific comment as we go through it. We blocked out people's names, so no, we're not putting anybody out there, so you don't need to worry about that if your client comes up or shows up on the screen. But I think it would just be good just to kind of go over some best practices and also take away some learning that has happened maybe from another agent and what they went through in their final walk. And I did cover Washington and Idaho. There is some slight differences. So you guys, if you are licensed on one side or the other, it'll be nice to see the comparison between one state over, the other as far as the way that they roll through. So let's go to the next slide. So the common questions, this is probably the most common. Rochelle, I think the listing I have pending in Renton that will close next week. So sometimes you have to get me involved earlier than you probably may like to, because sometimes when it's up to like the day before closing, there's not a lot we can do except for to ask for an extension. The sooner things are kind of going sideways with the walkthrough, or you're not able to, the problem is the timelines are so tight. And I'll show you that in a minute, but this was an email that I received from somebody that has a closing in Renton. And the question was a great question. I don't know if we've ever covered it. Do I need to be present? And does my seller have to be present as well? And is it basically like a showing of a property, but with both parties presented? I think present is what I think they meant to say. So let's start with this one. This is really the common question, is like, who needs to be present? What is it like? How do we kind of go through those steps? Our transaction coordinators actually handled these walkthroughs so well. But the number one thing is, do I need to be present? Again, you have to follow the guidelines that have been set forth in the listing. So if the listing is such where it said in the listing, seller must be present, or there's a key box, or there's an appointment only, or there's a renter in the house, you have to follow the rules that the MLS has set forth as far as, do you need to be present? A walkthrough is considered just like a showing as far as the rules of the various MLSs that we work with. So just make sure that you're following the rules as far as who needs to be present. If you are going in, I would say this is a perfect opportunity for you to be present. I would advise most of the time a walkthrough that you are present during that period of time. Does the seller have to be present as well? Depends on the deal. Some of the deals have a lot of complexity to them. For example, I've had a seller that was there for the walkthrough because they had asked for us to go through the sprinkler system to show us how to turn on the sprinkler system. New construction, they usually have a representative that's there for the walkthrough. So those instances where there's a lot of complexity, or where the buyer needs a lot of instruction, or there's a lot of things going on, that's when the seller would need to be present. But really, I've done most of my walkthroughs where the seller is not present. They're present with their agent. And the purpose of the walkthrough is just to make sure that everything that we toured, when we toured the property, when we actually got mutual acceptance, that the property is in the same condition as when we toured it, when we wrote the offer. So we're just verifying. We cannot use it as a contingency to back out. It's not an inspection. It's basically like another showing of the property. So that's right, Shannon. She's going right to the next slides. Keep me moving. That's why I love having Shannon help me out here with these slides. What it's not an inspection. So it is definitely not that. It's an opportunity to verify the work orders, and like no new material damage can take place. So for example, I had one happen personally for me. This was 2 years before COVID. It was 2019. And we did a walkthrough. And when we did the walkthrough, there was water damage coming out. Now, this was a vacant house. In fact, the owner of the company happened to be one of those relocation companies. Some of you have worked with Altair before. This was like a nightmare Altair deal. If you've ever worked with Altair, they have so much complexities anyways to the deal. But this one was difficult in so much as we did a walkthrough. Thank goodness we walked through, because we noticed that there was water coming out, like a pipe under the sink had actually come apart, and a drip had slowly just flooded the entire kitchen floors. And so we had to work with the seller, which happened to be a relocation company, who then had to verify with the insurance provider of the house to get the issues resolved before we close. So we were looking at probably on that deal, we ended up doing 2 or 3 extensions. I believe it ended up closing in January of 2020, just because of all of the extensions that we had to do because of the work that needed to be done. If we would have closed that deal with Altair, that would have been my buyer's responsibility. So while it was not an inspection, it was an opportunity for my buyers to view the property just one more time to make sure there was no material damage that was not disclosed at the time of the sale. So it does say that it's not a walkthrough, is just there's no material damage, leaks. Make sure that the fixtures are working, the lights can be turned on and off, the plumbing works, the appliances are still there. And, you know, it also is an opportunity for them to maybe measure to make sure that the moving truck will fit into the carport, or the moving truck will be able to get into that parking space in the condo complex. It's also to ensure that the seller is in the process of moving out. Make sure that we don't need to do an extension or negotiate some sort of last minute thing with the sellers because of their moving plans. It also is to make sure that we review the systems of the house, like that our buyers feel comfortable, especially first-time home buyers, knowing where that water shutoff would be and make sure that they understand where the water heater would be located. This is an opportunity. Some people maybe have bought the home without seeing it. I did when I bought one of the homes that I purchased, and the walkthrough, I couldn't back out of the deal, but I certainly could make sure that I knew, you know, I can measure to make sure that I had the right, you know, carpet, and that I was going to replace the my bedroom furniture, and I wanted to make sure that I had the right size, and I could go with a king size bed versus a queen size bed. It's okay for those types of things to happen during the walkthrough. You just need to realize that it's not an inspection and it's not a contingency allowing your buyer to terminate the deal for anything that's found. It does open up door for a lot of communication. So that's where we want to talk about today. Let's go to the next slide. So this is taken right from the Washington State Purchase and Sale Agreement. I have this entire section memorized because I've dealt with so many issues when it comes to walkthroughs. But on our actual purchase and sale agreement in line 77, it talks about that the buyer reserves the right to do a walkthrough of the property within 5 days of closing to verify that the seller has maintained the property and the systems and appliances as required by this paragraph. So it talks about having 5 days. Now, if you are an old timer like me, you'll remember the time where this was actually placed in a different section of our contract. And it was in 22D back in the day, if you remember that. And it was actually placed in such a way where if you did not include a Form 22D, then you did not have a walkthrough, and it created a lot more problems for designated brokers and managing brokers to deal with issues like that we have, even with this in the contract. So the forums committee got together and decided, I can't remember, back in probably 2018, 2019, somewhere in there, and they put it into the actual contract. So if it's been a while since you read the contract, you'll find that the 5-day default clause is already embedded in section F of the purchase and sale. So your client is automatically granted, if you're representing a buyer, 5 days to schedule that walkthrough, just to make sure that everything's in the same condition of equal. The appliance is at least the equal quality. It even talks about the appliance being at least in quality of that. Let's say that the refrigerator blows out. Wouldn't you know it? Sometimes happens around the holidays, probably around Thanksgiving. And then the seller's panicking, going, what do I do? Well, in our Washington State contract, they would have to replace the system or appliance with at least the same quality. So most likely that buyer is going to get a new, they're going to get a new refrigerator in that instance. Shannon had one, I think, a couple months ago where they actually got a new furnace. We actually did not have a home warranty placed on the property, and the furnace went out. And so we actually had to shop around to try to replace that furnace. And we actually got a great deal on that, but that happened before closing. And so therefore the seller was responsible for replacing it because it was inoperable or malfunctioned before closing. Okay, so let's go to the next one. The Idaho contract, slightly different. Now they have what they call, I would say, 2 walkthroughs. We actually in Washington, on this side of the border, I'm currently in Washington today, we actually have 2 as well. However, they embed their walkthrough ours is like seller inspection, like to check to make sure that the inspection is done. And that's found in our Form 35 for the Washington state. On the Idaho, though, they embed their kind of their check-in policy. You could say that with their inspection. They basically have 2 walkthroughs. They have 3 days, 3 business days after the deadline of completion of the repairs. And then they have a second walkthrough that they can do, and it commences, if not filled out, 3 days prior to closing of the property. So if you're working on both sides of Washington, Idaho, if you want to just make it very simple for your mind, you could just go ahead, instead of writing in the 3 days, it's 3 days as the default. You could make that the same essentially as Washington by just entering in 5 days. That might be helpful for those of you who are working on both sides of the state. And also gives plenty of time to get ahead of something if something's not going well. Communication, as a buyer's agent, you want to communicate early. So if there were some things that happened on the inspection, or you needed some clarity on something, definitely communicate that. Have a good communication. This would happen to be text message. Buyers would like to conduct a final walkthrough tomorrow. Would this work for your sellers? And then the text message, you are good for tomorrow. What time? So again, some better communication would, if you're going to be the buyer's agent and you have 3 days, or you have 5 days before closing, make sure you text the agent, kind of get ahead of things. There's nothing wrong with you texting and just saying, I looked at the contract and I want to just make sure that we schedule the time, the date. The better text message would be, buyers would like to conduct their final walkthrough on December 13th at 7 p.m. Will that work for the sellers? And then that way they could just simply text them back, say, yep, that's good for them. Thanks so much. There wouldn't have to be this back and forth about time and date and all of that. Contractually, in both Washington and Idaho, you have the right to conduct the final walkthrough. You just need to communicate as an agent on timing and scheduling to make sure it makes sense. A lot of the conflict that we have really comes down to communication, where the listing agent or the buyer's agents are just so busy, and they maybe need to hire a transaction coordinator, because the transaction coordinators, they do a lot of this communication back and forth for you on your behalf. And so that you don't have to really worry about this. That's one thing I love about a TC, is some of these final details. I'm kind of on to the next deal or on to the next seller, or working with some other hotter issues than having to communicate about walkthrough and little things like where the keys are exchanged and how do I get access to the garage door opener and things of that nature. So make sure that your TC is working for you. If they're not doing that type of work, press them in the next year. Example as a listing agent, I want to make sure we have enough time to cover my 2 examples here tonight. So I'm glad Shannon's kind of keeping me going. Here is a list of things that were found through a walkthrough yesterday. Front door screen is broken. So this was an example of a listing agent taking, it's again, text message, not legal in Washington. You got to put it in writing. To put it in writing, you need to email, or you need to put it on an addendum. So this is what I advise that they do. And they emailed the listing agent. Here's a list of things found during the walkthrough yesterday. Number 1, the front door screen is broken and cannot be closed. The dishwasher is completely shut, cannot be forced to open. The oven cannot be closed to function properly. The fridge says power failure. The boat in the backyard needs to be removed. The broken sink in the storage needs to be removed. Again, this is just, I hope it's not our listing agent. We represented, I think we represented the seller at this point. So it puts a lot of pressure on us as a listing agent when we don't talk with our sellers about these types of things that they're obligated to fix per the contract. So what happens is, in these instances where the sellers skip town, left town, guess what? We have to deal with it because we are representing this particular seller. The deal is supposed to close 4 days later, September 16th. However, the buyer is thinking of terminating the deal unless the seller gives another price reduction. They think the market is continually going down. It's not a good time to invest. The buyer would like the seller to lower the price to 1.4. The buyer will back out. So I took that section from another email, but because I wanted to show this is what the buyer wrote. Are they allowed to back out? They're not. Without losing their earnest money. They certainly would lose and walk away from, I think on this one, it was $50,000 worth of earnest money. The buyer could back out, but they would lose their $50,000 of earnest money, but they are attempting to leverage that and basically saying, we need these things fixed. So as a listing agent, it was our job to make sure that we go ahead and talk with our seller, get a handyman out there, call me, call a contractor that you know. Some of the things we may have to work out an agreement on how to get that boat removed. That might be a little bit more challenging, but these are real examples, you guys. And so if you are representing the seller and you see all of these little things, don't wait until the walkthrough to basically get a laundry list from that buyer's agent who's enforcing that part of the contract. Another example, as a buyer's agent, I'd like to schedule a final walkthrough for my buyers on Tuesday, May 26th at 4:30. Please confirm this will work for your sellers. Also, can you please provide updated pictures and receipts for repairs completed as per agreement on Form 35R? Again, this must have been a Washington agent. Thanks so much. Very good email correspondence. It doesn't come at you. Very simple. Just wants some, wants to confirm that time and date will work. This email, I think, was sent off at, I think, after the inspection was completed and after she had found out that the work orders were completed. They had asked for pictures or receipts in their response. And so they wanted to make sure that they got that. Very, very good job, Lisa, on that one. All right, let's go to the next one. This is an example of working together, or where you need to work together. So that, again, after the inspection would be the appropriate time to discuss what does that walkthrough look like. I wouldn't wait till like the day before the walkthrough on your contract to have a conversation, especially when there's a lot of things going on in the property or the strained relationships of the parties. Overall, the inspection went well, nothing to really call out. One item that came up, we couldn't find the remote that operated the lower bedroom mini split. Any thoughts where that may on the lakeside yard facing the water, there's a large green access lid down the left side of the property. We couldn't be behind the cherry tree. Again, very descriptive language. This is an example of an email where you'd want to keep your email, because if we get to the walkthrough and some of these things that we've had conversation about aren't dealt with, then now we have something to reflect on, and we can actually work with the seller and with the listing agent to get to the bottom of it. Lastly, I know there's much to know or learn about the home. Kathleen would welcome a walkthrough orientation on the home and property if you're up to that at your earliest convenience. You both can also discuss the furnishings more in detail to clarify items that may or may not be of interest. This would be an example where it may be smart to have the seller there, especially if you're dealing with furniture, mini split, some things that are kind of unique. Maybe there's a security system that's really complicated. Maybe there's kind of like some special landscaping that needs to be cared for in a certain way. That's an example of where it might be good to introduce the seller and the buyer to do that walkthrough together. But oftentimes it's just working the two agents together to make sure that we can properly do the walkthrough. I've had great success where I have the seller and the buyer working together, but those are properties that have a lot going on. Maybe there's a lot of codes and a lot of wireless. Personally, when I bought my house, it had a lot of working components, and it was kind of awkward when we met the seller, because he's kind of like trying to move and trying to get things going. So it's not common actually to have the seller there. It's actually uncommon. So you do the best you can as an agent to work with the other agent to get at some of these last minute questions. And it's okay to put that in writing. So when everything goes wrong, which sometimes it does, I'd say 25% of the deals, where maybe the buyer's like, I'm too busy, Rochelle, can you just do the walkthrough for me? I've had that happen. Make sure you document, take your phone, take video, make sure that you walk through, because what could happen is, well, I wasn't given an opportunity to walk through, and the contract says I had 5 days or I had 3 days to walk through the house, and Rochelle just did the walkthrough for me. I could say, well, I did the walkthrough because you were too busy at work and you couldn't make the time to go out and do it, but I did take a video and this is what we saw. So as much as you can document when you do the walkthrough for your clients, that would be helpful. You also need to realize when you do a walkthrough that once the deal closes, you become that client, that buyer or that seller then becomes your customer. It's no longer the client. So once the deal is closed, funded, recorded, all done, and they may or may not have done the walkthrough, then you become like a customer service representative rather than an agent in that instance. And so when everything goes wrong, let's say that boat on that earlier example didn't get removed, or that that kitchen the refrigerator wasn't totally cleaned out and there was junk all over that was maybe left behind. That becomes, unfortunately, a customer service issue where you may have to chip in, where you may have to pay for a cleaner, you may have to pay for a mover, you may have to pay for a junk removal company to come in. So a lot of these things can actually be prevented by having more communication and having a walkthrough. I've never been sorry about doing a walkthrough. There's been times where it's been perfect. And there's been more times than not where I'm like, thank goodness we just did a walkthrough to confirm a few things. If it goes wrong, and let's say it closes in that instance where there's a boat and there's all these things that goes wrong and there's massive flooding, say that example that if I didn't do that walkthrough, the whole kitchen would have been flooded. Unfortunately, at that point, the only thing I can do in those instances, I would have to send my client a full copy of their purchase and sale agreement, a copy of their inspection report, a copy of any warranties that were provided when they purchased the home, a copy of the inspection report, a copy of the Form 17 or the disclosure statement in the state of Idaho, and give them some examples or some recommendations of attorneys that I trust for them to go talk to an attorney and address the matter with an attorney. Some of them, if they're little and they're not extreme, like the flooding of the kitchen, many of those cases would go to small claims court. And again, I don't participate unless I did something wrong. So again, it comes down to the contract. What did the contract say? What did the disclosure say? And how does that attorney help that buyer or that seller in dealing with that matter? It becomes a client versus customer service relationship matter after the close of escrow. So it's my word of caution also with rental and rent back agreements. If you have a seller and you can discover early in the negotiations that maybe it's not looking so hot, maybe the client's just, I hate to say it, but maybe they're kind of messy, or it's just like they've got a lot of clutter in their house. That may not be a good one where you do a rent back, where you let the seller rent for free type of situation, because that walkthrough becomes null and void. You really don't get an opportunity to do a walkthrough if the seller's going to stay maybe for 2 weeks later or a couple days later. It's a different type of walkthrough than, say, somebody that's, living in the house and staying after. And I know that's happening a lot in Idaho. I sat through a class last week in Idaho, and that was the number one complaint that they're hearing over in Idaho, is that we had sellers staying after, and then buyers going, oh my gosh, when I'm actually moved into the house, the seller had trashed as they were moving out. They came down the stairway and dented the hallway all the way down. There was scratches on the floors. The garage was filled with stuff. So these were some of the horror stories that I heard about Idaho. And I thought, my goodness, the only thing that I can think of, and that's the reason, is there wasn't a good enough, solid enough rental agreement. And there was a lot of trust in that seller who was going to stay over. And there's really nothing that the Idaho state contract could do in those types of circumstances, if it's built on trust and a relationship, because it becomes a customer service relationship issue, even in the state of Idaho. Goes the same way in Washington when you're dealing with a rental agreement or a rent back situation. Walkthroughs become more of just kind of hello and goodbye type of situations. There's not a way to basically say, hey, we toured the house and you've moved out, and then there's all of these things that we need to address. So there's nothing I can really do to help you in those circumstances when the deal closes. And that's what I've got tonight. Wow, 6 o'clock. I had to talk fast to get through it all. Candace, Shannon, did I cover what we needed to for today?
Yeah, I've got a couple comments that came through, but it looks like Mark had a question. So Mark, I'll let you start.
Go
Oh,
ahead, Mark.
Go for
thanks. If something like the boat example,
Yep.
if the contract states that, the boat has to be removed or such and such, obviously the contract states that the house has to be turned over in the same condition it was when you made the offer. So
Correct.
the refrigerator doesn't work. Am I correct in saying you don't have to close until that refrigerator is fixed or that boat is moved, because that's in the contract?
That's correct. We'd have to write that into the contract though. And you'd probably have to get me involved, Mark, so that we could draft the proper extension to deal with that. Because
Okay, I just wanted, because I thought you had said like, oh, well, at that point it's a go to court issue, but I would hope that
No.
would not.
I mean, that the sooner we know about it, the better, right? So if we've done a walkthrough, it's just the ones that become a little hairy, Mark, are the ones that are same day, right? We're closing. In fact, the people have already signed their papers. I get a phone call. They did the walkthrough the same day that they signed papers. And then all of a sudden we've got an appliance that's not functioning. Then we have to do like either an escrow holdback, right? Because you're not going to get a refrigerator the same day. There's no way. We have to basically negotiate either a holdback or an extension on those circumstances. So yeah, I apologize if I misled you on that, because there is some up until closing, till it closes, we do have the right to negotiate that extension or that rent back or that situation. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
Yep. Boats become difficult. Yep. Boats are like, that's a tough one. So be specific. If you're asking for the boat to remove, make sure you clarify that needs to be, you might want to give yourself some more time.
Yeah, I will pipe in, Mark, just in that scenario. I had one about a year ago where they had an abandoned vehicle on the property, and it was like some sort of vintage, this seller was like a tinkerer, right? And they had a car that was on the property, and when we did the final walkthrough, it was still there. It's like they'd moved out, but then the car was still there. And so, it's just all a part of that communication with that listing agent saying, hey, what's the plan with the car? And then they're like, oh, well, they're planning to pick it up, or, oh, a buddy of theirs is picking it up or whatever tomorrow. It's all about having that communication early.
Yeah. And put it in writing if you can, so you can reflect on that. Just say on.
In
December
Washington too, I think people underutilize the 22D. On the second page, there's an excluded items. And there's also the included items as well, where you can indicate, what's going to be included, what's not going to be included. So if there's like pergolas or cars, statues, chandeliers, I mean, you name it, we've heard it. That's what you can use on those terms to clarify what's included and what's not.
I had a statue one time, Shannon. It was like a $22,000 statue that we were debating on who was going to come pick up the statue. And we actually called the contractor, and then they ended up negotiating, wanting to keep the statue. And it was something that definitely didn't belong in the house. It was one culture over another culture. And it was fascinating how that all got itself worked out, but all within that 1 to 2 day period of time before closing. And it was very, very frustrating to see people communicate about something that was so expensive, and it was a fixture, but it was one of those questionable things. So you name it, I've seen it. Nothing shocks me. I've negotiated banana tree leaves. I mean, that's also a fun one. Candace, anything else from you?
No, I think that's good. I think though too, just kind of with the changes that we've seen in the market, and last year things were going so fast, and I think you could almost get away with having your sellers not do their due diligence and clearing the property and getting rid of things. I think the best thing you can do now is just set those expectations early on, that how the house should be at the end. And there's that section on the 22D that states it very well. Our cleaning differences may be, they can be very vast, but at least clearing and making sure the house is in decent condition and setting that expectation early.
Yeah, I'll echo too what Candace says. I think it's all about leveraging your partners. So as you're closing a transaction, if you're not using a transaction coordinator and you're working another job, you really should leverage a transaction coordinator that can handle a lot of those details for you. The other thing too is a home warranty is huge. Rochelle mentioned one with a furnace. I had a client, and thank goodness I had a home warranty that I paid for on that property, because 2 weeks into moving in, their refrigerator and their furnace went out. And those are both items that were covered under their policy, was covered under their home warranty. So leverage some of those things. That certainly will help you as you navigate a customer service type of relationship rather than a client. That Rochelle mentioned, that comes in handy a lot. And I think too, the other thing too that comes up and crops up a lot in a more balanced market like right now is making sure that you have the two things that I would certainly have from a customer service angle, as well as making sure you have a cleaner that you can refer business to. It's a way for you to find someone in your community that you can just say, hey, I will give you 100% of my business. Can you be my cleaner, my designated cleaner for properties, and have that relationship with someone? Because I know from at least my perspective, geez, it crops up a lot, where people just, they say that they clean, but one person's definition of clean is very different than another's. And it's one of those things that you can give as a gift, if you don't know what to give. Another one too. So it's a cleaner. The other one was an attorney. So making sure that you have a attorney's office that you can refer to if something cropped up and it's out of our control, it's out of our hands, our agency duties are over, at least give them 2 or 3 attorneys that you can refer to your clients.
Somebody posted junk, Debbie. Yes, definitely junk person. Somebody that can go out there and get all the junk done. Best Choice Realty Homes.com / web vendors. Is that right, Shannon? Is what we
Yeah,
have.
I think so. It's on our website. Just click on vendors on the top.
Yep. So we actually have some lists. We need to get that. I know Mark is over in the Idaho side of things, and we'll grow that with Sarah and some of the others. We've got about 15 brokers that work now, Washington and Idaho. So it's kind of exciting to see things grow on both sides of the state. But yes, we'll grow that as we grow over there. So if you have good people that you want to give more business and leverage, expand their business in next year, I've already asked Mark, Sarah, anybody that's over there on the Idaho side, if you want to send me some of your vendors, like maybe you don't personally have, 20 sales in a year to give them, but certainly with the group, we certainly can give them more business. So it's all about the scaling of the business model and giving those vendors, the ones that are good, giving them more business into next year. So thanks for those recommendations, you guys over there on the east side. East side not meaning east side of the Puget Sound, east side meaning Spokane and Idaho. Appreciate your help there as we grow. Anything else, Shannon, that came through? Any other chats that you guys had?
No, but I had a couple people ask for referrals. Just send us a message afterwards, and I'm happy to give you referrals for those attorneys that I mentioned today. There's several, and no attorney is created alike. I think I had someone who asked me yesterday. They're like, "Oh, well, they work for an attorney's. I have a friend that works in an attorney's office," and I go, "Okay, well, what area of the? Yes, they're attorney, but what area and which area do they service?" Seattle attorneys are different than Tacoma attorneys, that's for sure.
Very good. Mark, do you have another question?
This is Emily.
Oh,
Go ahead,
yeah.
Emily.
I'd also recommend talking to your buyers, especially if they're from out of state and might do things a little differently at the very beginning. Tell them, hey, guess what? If the carpet gets cleaned, that's a bonus. It's broom swept. That means that there's no big pieces of junk. You don't get the carpet cleaned. There might be tiny little pinholes and screws in the wall. You don't get the whole wall repainted. Okay. I've dealt with that twice. So
I know it's crazy too, because they think that, right, Mark, that it's kind of sometimes if they bought new construction, they think the walkthrough on a resale is like new construction, and it's not. And so the more you can educate and advise them, just like you said, it's got to be broom swept. That'll make them feel like not surprised when they go through. But yes, I've had that happen as well, where it's like they get there like, whoa, what happened? It looks, the carpet's dirty, and they're nitpicking everything. And that's not what that's for. It's just meant to get it, we just need to get it professionally cleaned. Great. And Emily, go ahead. Did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I have a question. I have a comment about the yard and a super quick comment about text. I had a buyer's agent tell me 2 days before closing, not too long ago, that they wanted this really super heavy pagoda removed from the yard. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to argue about it, but it's like, okay, I know stuff planted stays unless, you tag it and the seller wants to take it. I take all my pots. I tell people the potted plants leave. But that pagoda was a real pain in the butt, and it was right the last second. I didn't want to argue it. This broker was, threatening to kind of pull out and this and that and the other. So I just did it. But what about the statues and the heavy things and the, a waterfall that's attached to the yard if it's got water, systems in it. But what about the other stuff? I mean,
it's really just attachment. And what is attached, what's not to the landscaping, right? And so what's, if it's like a statue, like in my case, which is a nice, big, huge $22,000 statue, right? And it would have taken, to get that removed, it would have taken a contractor that had a truck and a lift that was big enough to lift it onto their truck. I mean, it's quite just to get that done was, and the statue itself was worth a lot of money. So in that case, just like in your case, the listing agent, we represent the buyer in that instance. The seller, the listing agent actually had to work with the contractor to get it removed. And the buyers just were like, I'm like, are you sure that's worth value? It's probably worth, And they're just like, we just don't want that type of structure in our culture. That's not, that doesn't serve us well. And so
Yeah.
we did go forward and have that removed. So I think it
Yeah.
really comes down. The only thing I wish I would have done differently, Emily, is had more conversations when I wrote that contract about that statue, because I knew
Right.
that we're dealing
And-
with two different cultures. And when we walked through, I knew that they didn't like that.
Yeah. And the same with listings. I mean, I'm talking to some listing sellers right now about even like the curtains, because I honestly, I didn't notice that the contract now says not only do the curtain rods stay because they're attached, but the curtains stay. I was like, oops, that's a new one that I missed. Sure, Michelle
Yes,
talked
and
about
I'm
it, but
so
I
glad
missed
you
that.
brought that up. I should have talked about that in the call earlier, Emily, that yes, in Washington, curtain panels, curtains, window coverings, all of that
Yep.
is labeled in the contract, and they did change that.
Not just blinds because they're screwed in, or not just the rods because they're screwed in, but the dressings. Yes, absolutely. One last comment. You made mention about texting. We are also text heavy. Be sure and don't put it off like, oh, I'll do this tomorrow. And if you do, per our text messages of Wednesday, put it in the email, per our text messages of Wednesday, blah, 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 please remove the boat. Be sure and do an email about your text messages that are important, because it gets us in trouble without it.
That's right. No, and there's a way to do that. And the way Emily described to do that is the right way. Per our conversation, or per our text conversation, here are the things that my transaction coordinator or I'm going to be looking for when we do the walkthrough. So you put it in writing. You have to put it in writing. Otherwise, it does not become legal. So it's going to be a he said, she said kind of thing with instances like that. So thanks for the reminder on those two things, Emily. I appreciate your input. Anybody else have any questions or concerns? Those were great. Okay. Definitely needed topic, Shannon. So home run tonight for getting that out there. Hopefully that helps you, a lot of you guys. If you have any kind of questions or closings that are going a little crazy right now, or you're wondering about how to deal with something, it's better to just pick up the phone and call me, Shannon, Candace, anybody that's licensed on our team, just to kind of get their take on things. More eyes on it, the better. Is this common? I've never experienced anything like that. It will actually, Sava had a question. Go ahead, Sava. Maybe she pushed the button. She likes pushing buttons, huh?
Can you hear me?
There you go. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Sava.
good. One quick question that I have is, what happens? What are the legal rights if the sellers are still on the property on the day of closing?
Yep, that's happened. So in both state of Washington and the state of Idaho, if the seller still stays on the property, basically without a contract or a rent back of some sort, then they have the right to sue. So it's a seller performance type of lawsuit that can be filed against the seller. Those are never good, because they also would be required to pay commissions, fees, all of that associated with the sale. So it's a seller performance issue, Sava, and they're very, very ugly. And luckily, I have not had to deal. I've only had to deal with my entire career with two of those instances.
Right.
So it's rare, but it does happen.
Nightmare.
Yep.
It's my biggest nightmare, because it has happened to us once before, where the sellers themselves left, but then they rented it, right? They rented to their tenants. There wasn't a legal document, which means they had to take it to court.
Yep.
And it took a year of litigation.
Horrible. I know. And there
So
was,
for example, like on the day of, it's too late at that point, because it's already been like on its way to
closed.
record.
That's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah, they're ugly. There was a lady in my class when I took the class last week in Idaho, and same thing happened to her, Sava. She had two of them that she was litigating from last year, where they're trying to get the tenants out, and it's just, they're nightmares. The deal's already closed. There's nothing that legally can be done from our vantage point. Is all based on the attorneys that have to get involved.
I wish there was a way to say, unless they have physically removed and there's physical evidence that they are no longer there, that's when it should close. That's what I want to advocate for.
Yep, pushing that a little bit more. That would be nice. But unfortunately, the laws written in both Washington and Idaho, it doesn't have a lot of, specifics, I would say, around the physical. And then COVID happened, right? And so there's a lot of that happened as well. So I hear you, Sava, but be very careful on those circumstances, so we don't have that happen again, right? Where we have people staying after That's never
I
fun.
know I have a transaction closing on the 30th. I just have this feeling for some reason they seem to kind of because they wanted to do a post closing possession where I would become a landlord. I'm like, no, 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 no. So I
Yeah.
just feel like they may push it. So I thought I'd ask just to see if there's any changes in the law.
Nope, no changes that I'm aware of. And I'm on both sides of the state now. So yeah,
Yeah, yes, you are.
I know.
Cool. Thanks, so. Yeah.
All right. Anything else? Shannon, anything else from you?
No, I think we're great.
All right, you guys have a super week. Hopefully I'll see a lot of you on Wednesday. We're just doing our come in open house style, bring your favorite treat to share, and we'll love to see you if you want to stop into the office in Tukwila. Have a great week. And if we don't see you, I'll see you next Monday.